Our moderator for the next part of our program, Carol Saab, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So she will be joined by the Mayor of Vaughan, Mauricio Bevilacqua, the Chief of Ottawa Police, Peter Slowly, the Vice President of CIJA Quebec, Ita Yudin, and the Education Director and Curator for the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, Ilona Solman-Spar. Carol, over to you.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue.
Welcome, everybody, to today's roundtable. I'm Carol Saban. I'm the head of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities.
The federal government and everybody involved for the invitation to be here with you today and the work to organize today's summit. I've been listening and learning all afternoon, and it is so very appreciated and important. I'll also recognize that I'm speaking with you today from Ottawa on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. At the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, our more than 2,000 member municipalities are deeply seized by the issues that have brought together so many of us and so many Canadians to these summit discussions over the next 2 days. And I'm proud to say that municipal leaders are well represented among the participants here, including our President, Mayor Joanne Vander Hayden. On this panel, we're here to tackle the intersection between community leadership and countering anti-Semitism, a mission that I know is of critical importance in cities and towns across Canada.
So we know that inclusive communities is a goal that we should all work towards. Too many Canadians targeted by hate crimes based on their religion. The Jewish community in Canada is as proud and dynamic as all those living in Canada, and we have to do everything to build a country where they can have the freedom of practicing their religion in peace.
Discussions, and I know FCM's membership feels strongly about the need for on-the-ground community action to tackle anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms. I'm joined today, as you heard, by a group of local leaders who are each contributing to the fight against anti-Semitism in their own communities and from coast to coast to coast. It's great to be with you all today and to hear more about the community action you've seen and have led to combat anti-Semitism in Canada. I know our time together is brief, so I'll do my best to ensure everyone gets a chance to lead off on at least one question where time permits, let you all respond to each other's comments, but let's jump right into the discussion. We know that Canada's Jewish community is one of the most frequently targeted groups for religiously motivated hate crimes in the country. You heard from Irwin Cotler this morning some of the really staggering numbers in terms of the increase of anti-Semitism across the country. This is a situation that is and must be acceptable to no one. So from a community-focused point of view, Chief Slowly, I'll start with you. From your perspective, how well has civil society been responding to this threat, and where can we be doing more?
Merci beaucoup, Carol. And like you, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with Canadians from across this country to talk about such an important issue. Let me just tell you, first of all, I really enjoyed the virtual lunch. I think I put on an extra 2 pounds. Just a little bit of lightening of the humor there. Let me get into the serious part of my response. At the heart of this, for me, this is leadership, or the lack thereof. I will tell you that I don't want to know of any person in Canada who would seek to take public office, either as an elected official or as a public servant, who would not be fully personally committed to advancing human rights and doing everything they can to address the issue of hate in society, whether a hate crime or a hate incident. For me, before I came and applied to be the chief of police in the nation's capital, I reached out to not only former police chiefs and currently serving police officers, I reached out to community leaders from every one of our major demographic and, yes, religious communities, including, to my great honor, the ability to speak to now deceased Rabbi Bulka. May his soul rest in peace. And it wasn't until I convinced myself that I understood the nature of the concerns around public safety, personal safety, and particularly around the context of hate for those community leaders, including Rabbi Bulka, that I could commit myself to taking on such a position as chief of police in the nation's capital. That only then did I decide to make my application formal and to follow it through to the position I'm in now. Don't become a frontline police officer, a frontline public servant in any institution. Don't aspire to or apply to be a leader of any one of those institutions or an elected official unless you can personally commit yourself and then through your office that you hold, commit your organization to advancing human rights and addressing hate in all of its forms, in particular around anti-Semitic hate. The second area would be around the approach to actual hate incidents, because no matter how much we personally and institutionally commit ourselves to this, it will still happen. It is unfortunately carved into the DNA code of every human being everywhere in the world, in every part of Canada. So it will happen. When it happens, it must be reported. It is still one of the most underreported crimes anywhere in Canada. That must change. All of us have a responsibility to promote the reporting of hate incidents, hate crimes, even if you're not sure that it would reach the designation level of hate. It is incredibly important that you report it to the police of your jurisdiction. If you do not trust the police, and I understand why that might be the case, report it to a leader in your community and use an intermediary to get that information to the police. Underreporting, even though we've seen a spike in hate incidents, underreporting is actually one of the most critical factors that is undermining our local, provincial, and federal response to hate incidents. It has to be a whole spectrum approach. Prevention and education. Prevention starts with education. People need to know what this is about so they can actually identify it and then report it and then effectively respond to it. So a full range of societal actors have to be involved in this, not from any one community or not from any one segment of public institutions, the full range. The best example I've seen here in Ottawa was a hate incident that happened to the Black community within a Christian church. It was reported to a group of other leaders, not to the police directly. Rabbi Bulka himself got involved in the early intervention. He assisted in bringing in the police. There was a full investigation, but more importantly, there was a whole of community, whole of city response to it. That is a model of operations for all of us, whether you're in a small town or whether you're in the most populous province in all of Canada. My last example would be around the link between municipal, provincial, federal, and international. 2 years ago, I was blessed by this government to be asked to be the co-chair of a terrorism prevention group. It was co-chaired initially by Romeo Dallaire, later on involved people like Bob Ray. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see it all the way through as I took office here. But what I realized amongst the leaders from across Canada, from all different faith backgrounds and racial backgrounds, was that our national threat assessment had major blind spots. Now, I will say Minister Blair and his team at Public Safety Canada, my national security partners, have come a long way in a short period of time to recognize the blind spots, particularly around right-wing extremism, which is a lot of it is driven towards anti-Semitic activities and a lot of the rise in hate crime that we're seeing. That was a major flaw nationally, internationally, and it affected our ability locally to have intelligence to proactively prevent and address and mitigate these threats. A lot of correction has happened. I encourage you to continue on. I have much more to share, but that's it for now. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Chief. And I want to continue on this thread, really talking about what more needs to happen in our communities to address the challenge of anti-Semitic hatred, and maybe more from a specific tactics level as well, what we're seeing across the country happen. And Ida, maybe I'll start with you on this one, if you're able to comment on, what more do you think needs to happen? What tactics are you seeing that are successful, that communities are employing to keep up in 2021?
Thank you, merci. I want to touch on what the chief just started talking about in terms of the importance of reporting hate crimes. And I'd like to take it a step further. What we've seen is that there's also an equal importance in establishing a uniform definition of what would constitute an anti-Semitic hate crime. And to have that standard definition, I think, would be incredibly helpful for different law enforcement officials, judicial officials, to really understand the nature of the crime and what happened. And it would also encourage those who do underreport, because we know that these incidents are underreported. We know that our community underreports incidents of anti-Semitic hate. And I would also add that the establishment of hate crime units within law enforcement services across the country. I know in Montreal, a hate crime unit was established in 2016 following a local anti-Semitism summit that we did with then Mayor Denis Cotler. And that has made a world of difference. And in areas where there are hate crime units within police forces, we should be giving them all the resources and tools they need. And in areas where they don't exist, we should be creating them and enabling them, because it's a trained individual who can understand and decode the incident. Not everything is straightforward, and if you're not familiar with the vocabulary, if you're not familiar with the warning signs, it's much harder to pursue and prosecute. And I would say that the same thing continues through the thread. So once you have an effective partnership with law enforcement, which we do, and they've been incredible, particularly in the recent spate of incidents that we've seen on the ground in Montreal and across Canada. But at the prosecutorial level, to have a training and an understanding of what constitutes an anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic hate crime, and any hate crime for that matter against all forms of racism would be important and would be a significant tool if we can make sure that those charged with the enforcement, the protection, and the prosecution are armed with the training and understanding of to be able to decode the incidents and really pursue appropriate action in a way that completes the protection and completes the partnership with communities.
Thank you. Chief Slow, yes, go for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. And that was part of my more to come if the opportunity presented. So thank you for opening that door. A standard definition does not exist around hate crime, hate incidents. I saw a report just in preparing for today, at least 7 different definitions with major police services across Canada, with significant disparity between them. So that level of standardization actually needs to happen, and it needs to be informed by the communities who suffer the most from hate themselves, not just from legal experts and police leaders like myself. I couldn't agree more. That definition has to be held across all police services and across all Crown and federal provincial prosecutors. Attorneys general, solicitors general across Canada need to have standard definitions, standard practices, and standard capacity so that communities from coast to coast to coast can expect and receive a level of service in this area that they deserve and that the law requires, the spirit of the law requires. I reestablished the Ottawa Police Services Hate Crime Unit after it was disbanded 5 years ago. I rebuilt it last year, and I'm committed to ongoing investments because it is one of the #1 requested service capacities in this city, and I will be committed to advancing that going forward. So thank you very much, Eda. Thank you, Carol.
Hey, thank you both. There's a thread of this in what you're both discussing in terms of, underreporting and a hesitance to come forward. And we know from our work, we know what I hear from community leaders across the country, and their work is really around the importance of community outreach and really how that drives so much action that can be taken. And so maybe Dr. Shulman-Spar, I'll turn to you from this question, given your broad experience in outreach for Canada's Jewish community. How do you go about defining the various audiences who would benefit from those important conversations? How do you reach them? What's your experience been in this space?
Well, so let me clarify. Our outreach is mostly on an educational level. And so there are, in a way, 2 case scenarios. We have what I call more of a reactive approach, and that is when it defines itself where we need to reach out to the communities. For example, if there are anti-Semitic incidents at schools here in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, and there is definitely increase of that, and that's where we will step in. We work together with CITRA, with the Pacific region here, and we hear firsthand. And so, of course, those are the communities where we step in, and that it defines it by itself on the basis of the anti-Semitic incident. Let me share that besides the increase, it's not only that it was an increase, but also we see it now not only on a secondary school level, so high school level, but actually also starting already on an elementary school level. That's absolutely worrisome, and we recognize this. And so on a proactive front, we recognize this, and we do start to develop resources, educational resources that are even tailored for young students. And I'm talking students grade 5 and 6. But I want to, before I continue, I want to briefly comment on, we talked about definitions of hate crime. So for me, as someone who puts resources together, and we just developed a new resource on anti-Semitism, it's called Anti-Semitism, You Can Make a Difference. There is a major focus on media literacy, and I will talk to that later. But if you want to teach anti-Semitism or about hate crimes, I absolutely would agree that a common definition would help, because that's where it starts too, right, for educational reasons. So I hope we can all agree on definitions and the common definition that would make the work on the educational level easier as well. Let me say something about the education. So absolutely, it's important to, and you just heard me saying, start on an early level with young students and so on, high school, post-secondary. But education, and that's another need we hear and we see and we hope to address, is education also, not just on the school level and not just educators and students, it's on the administrative level, but then really education with other groups, really any groups, as part of the training about equity, inclusion, and diversity. And I'm thinking of, for example, police staff, people who are at the forefront, who fight in the first row. They need to understand and know what anti-Semitism is, the history of anti-Semitism, but really also so many diverse manifestations of how anti-Semitism manifests today. And so we understand this need, and those are definitely on our radar to reach out to these communities as well. I want to now add as a last point the importance of media literacy education. I think we cannot fight anti-Semitism without enhancing our media literacy skills. We've heard it already today. Online anti-Semitism is absolutely present. And I think we all have a lot to learn when it comes about media literacy. And again, it starts with young students, but also really the general public. And when I say media literacy education, it's the one thing to detect anti-Semitic tropes and hatred and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, so people understand what's fake news, what not, what is hatred, and what are credible sources. But it's also, media literacy training to me is also to reflect on our own online behavior and how can we combat it online, for example, in social media. And that's, in our resource that I mentioned, there is an entire chapter dedicated to that, because that's really what younger people or everyone is exposed to, and I think there is a lack there. And at this point, I actually would like to applaud the government. I know you heard us and our call out for the need for media literacy, and I know there are initiatives on the way. And so I thank you, and I truly think now we're at the stage where we have to implement it and bringing among people, educators, and really the general public.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I can turn to you for the same question, pull you in a little bit from a community outreach perspective, if I can ask you for a bit of a response here.
Sure. I'd really like to echo what Ilona just touched on. And I think that now more than ever, and I think in this year of COVID, this pandemic universe where we all relied on social media and the virtual universe much more than ever before, we've come to really understand the power of social media, and a national social media literacy campaign, I think, that really has powerful potential to educate the population and give not just young people, I mean, I've seen at home with my own kids what kids have been exposed to this year, even with the best of intentions from parents, but everyone. We all need to sort of be a little more educated in social media, because those voices that had in the past been relegated to the margins, the fringes of society, now have equal access and equal exposure in terms of social media. And we really have to focus on educating against anti-Semitism for sure. Jew hatred is at an all-time high, but against all forms of racism online. And I think if we all work together, we can make something truly, truly powerful. When we talk about anti-Semitism and defining anti-Semitism and understanding where it comes from, I think it's important to understand that anti-Semitism, unlike every other form of racism, it evolves, it mutates, it adapts, and we can find it in every sector. We talked a lot about the right, but as much as in the right, we can find it in the left, we can find it in different interest groups, social groups, Christian groups, in some Muslim groups. Anti-Semitism adapts to where it sits and becomes a tool for people to use. It's a sign, it's a predicator of radicalization, as Irwin Cotler often says, the canary in the mine shaft. And I think we all have to pay attention. Growing up, my mother was born in Iraq and grew up in Iraq in a very well-established family. My grandfather was a member of parliament there, and then she fled because it was no longer safe to be a Jew in Iraq. And I grew up thinking, wow, my children will have a different experience than my parents did. I will see generations follow me here and stay here in what I think is one of the best places to live in the world. Quebec, Canada, I feel grateful to be here. And I think, I just want to take a minute to say that the fact that we're having this conversation, that we've dedicated a day to talk about anti-Semitism, that we have so many ministers and members of government listening, paying attention to us, members of civil society working with us to fight anti-Semitism is so meaningful, because it's not just a Jewish problem, it's a societal problem. And if we don't work together, we can't really defeat it. And the fact that today we're starting with this conversation to work together and to move the issue forward, and the questions you're asking, Carol, are right on. What is it that we can bring forward in terms of meaningful programs? And we touched on some, but I would even add, when I look at communities around the world, what's being done in other communities. We can take our partnership with law enforcement a step further. The Community Security Infrastructure Program, which is amazing, and the announcement today that more will be invested in it is truly commendable, and I know will impact communities across Canada in a very positive way. But in cities around Europe, you have something called the Community Trust, which is currently operating in the UK, Australia, and South Africa, and it operates like a volunteer cadre of individuals who volunteer, who serve as non-armed patrols at communal buildings, synagogues, schools, community centers, museums, and works with law enforcement to help on the prevention side. And we know that this has been effective, and this is something that if we work together with government to seed and to create, we can have Jewish communities and other communities across Canada working with law enforcement to ensure that the protections of our communities is secured, and we're all doing what we can to move this needle forward.
Thanks very much, Ida. And I think, that's very well said on the fact that this is really going to require everybody working together on this, and really the importance of conversations like the one convened today in addressing all of this. And I want to sort of broaden that out a bit more. We've been all talking about the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen, how alarming that is. I know many Canadians are experiencing that, watching that, horrified by that. And seeing these acts of hatred, and are scared. And, Mayor Bevilacqua, you've been a real leader around this in your community. And I'm hoping I can start with you on this question, which is really in these moments when there are these acts of anti-Semitic hatred, how can leaders like yourself harness that to create change? You know, how can you pull something positive out of those kinds of real negative moments so that we can actually make progress in what is a very challenging time?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think in leadership, one of the most important things is clarity of purpose. You know, there are people in life that are motivated by what I refer to as higher frequency, love, compassion, understanding, mutual respect. And then there are those individuals in our society that are motivated by lower frequency, hate, greed, jealousy, all these issues that speaks to what I believe are the negative side of the human condition. And so that clarity is very important. So, and you have to manifest that purpose in meaningful ways. And so, for example, you were talking about the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. The city of Vaughan was the first municipality in the province of Ontario to actually adopt it. And why do I say this? Is because a leader needs to be all in. The fight against anti-Semitism is not sort of a part-time commitment. Every day in every way, you have to find ways to manifest your commitments towards anti-Semitism. And it means, you know, like working with organizations like the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the B'nai B'rith, UJ Federation, and also to work together with emerging organizations like the one Abraham Global Peace Initiative by Avi Ben Lolo, who is, you know, just starting but doing exceptional work. A leader needs to be present. You cannot be absent. You need to be physically, spiritually, and intellectually present in the area of anti-Semitism. It's about manifesting that commitment by recognizing an individual like Max Heidner, who's a great educator, who is the recipient of the Order of Vaughan, who is a writer, who I traveled with to Israel. Max is to me, Mike Tyson is to me is an individual that embodies that commitment. And why is that? Because on one hand, you have to educate people. On the other hand, you have to provide resources. On the other hand, which is three hands, by the way, now, what we're saying is we need to be committed to it in a way that you're committed in a profound committed way. And so whether you're celebrating Jewish Heritage Month, that is an opening for us to talk about anti-Semitism as well. Whether you're talking about, you know, raising the Independence Day flag or Holocaust Remembrance Day, these things provide a leader with an opportunity to speak about issues that are of concern to the community. But from the synagogues to promoting interfaith dialogue, to being present, to having clarity of purpose, it's a way that a leader can, in fact, contribute to resolving the issue of anti-Semitism. I think that it can't just be an intellectual discussion. It has to be a discussion that also manifests itself in practical ways. For example, supporting something, the Tour of the Humanity bus that goes to different cities throughout the country, talking about these issues that we are talking about today. I think that the intellectual, spiritual side needs also to be matched with the practical application of these thoughts and ideas. Like we can talk about human rights. We have all day today. We can talk about the rule of law. We can talk about democratic principles. But as a leader, you need to manifest those values, principles, and beliefs. And I do believe that values, principles, and beliefs, your actions need to be always aligned with your values, principles, and belief. And you have to take every single opportunity to promote values that we all collectively believe in. Look, sometimes, you know, we try to make things a little bit more complicated than they actually are. And look, in life, there is right and there is wrong. And these are absolutes. Focusing too much on the gray areas sometimes slows us down. Being an anti-Semitic individual is definitely wrong. It's not right. And those of us who believe on what is right in a society need to be vigilant. We need to guard those values because those values and those beliefs have been achieved at a high cost. And you have to respect that. You have to respect that. That is why I believe that education is important, but also, having zero tolerance for anti-Semitism is very important. I think that is a noble goal because very much in keeping with what we believe in. And if we believe that anti-Semitism needs to be defeated, then we collectively need to provide all the various actors in society, because you do need a multi-pronged approach towards defeating anti-Semitism, the required resources. And so while discussions can be very fruitful, they are only fruitful if the sentiments expressed and the resolutions that we collectively agree to are acted upon by providing also the proper resources to sustain our efforts. And anti-Semitism has deep. I mean, we all agree that anti-Semitism is wrong, except for the people that actually engage in anti-Semitism. And so we have to very quickly assess who are we dealing with. And, I think Eta and Ilona and the chief actually, in many ways stated that, look, we live in a different world today. We live in a different world where social media is working in favor and against us at the same time, where, our enemies are hidden. We don't see their faces, but the acts are still taking place. And so unless we have, and the other issues that I thought, if I may, it was very interesting how my fellow panelists, all three of them talked about the importance of clarity, right? Even in definitions and even in action, a sense of standardization across the country to tackle these issues, that in it itself requires leadership. People need to emerge to make sure that we have an action plan that is not only local or national in scope, but also meets the global criteria, because as we all know, anti-Semitic forces do not respect borders amongst countries. They're able to achieve their ends in various ways. And as a matter of fact, the international threat of anti-Semitism is something that has to be taken seriously. And I have benefited a great deal from the teachings of Irwin Cotler. I was a colleague of his in Ottawa for a number of years. And I can tell you, I learned a great deal from him. And one of the things that I've learned from Mr. Cotler is that, in fact, words, plans need to be actioned. And also, we have to measure our achievements. We have to have a way to measure how we are progressing. And it's not something that we do it just at a national summit, although I do think that, listening to the Prime Minister today was great. I really think that, and I know him, he was a former colleague of mine as well, that he's truly committed to this cause and helped, of course, by individuals like Irwin Cotler to move forward. And so I can tell you that in a nutshell, based on the question that you asked me, clarity is important, and you have to be purpose-driven. You cannot do this in a way that doesn't speak to true commitment, because the issue is requires a lot of energy, and you've got to be all in, and you've got to bring people in, and that is why I rely a great deal on organizations. We have one of the largest centers outside of Israel called Lubavitch Center in Vaughan, and the Jewish community has done so much work to really work together in a very harmonious with the rest of the community. That center, that is a Jewish center, is open to the entire public. You don't have to be a Jew and that is really something that I want to say about the Jewish community. The Jewish community is not an insular community. The Jewish community is a community that embraces people from all over. And as you know, that is also the reality of the state of Israel. And that is something that we in leadership roles have to keep in mind. You also have to engage. Like I've taken many trips to Israel. Why? Because I need to understand these issues. Why did I visit concentration camps? Because, reading is one thing, having the experience of going through that place that, evoked a lot of emotions in me, was part of my personal education as a leader to better understand the depth of these issues. And so I do think that there are many, many ways leaders can address these issues, and it's got to be, every day you've got to dedicate a little bit of time to this issue. But at the end of the year, you will know that you've had 365 either thoughts or actions related to this issue, and that's how you have to parcel it out, and that's how you can achieve change.
Hey, thanks. Thanks very much, Mayor. I think, I'm pleased. I think we have enough time to wrap in this way, which is really to give each of you an opportunity to answer really what advice you would leave with the folks listening to this session who may come away from today's summit, hopefully with a desire to do more to counter anti-Semitism in Canada, or to broaden their own understanding, or to keep learning. I've heard throughout the day today a really important message about needing to ground all of this in tangible action. And so if I could ask each of you for sort of as tangible as you can be, resources, strategies, whatever that might look like, your best piece of advice to leave with the audience today here as we wrap this up. Chief Slowly, I'll start with you.
I was almost hoping you'd bypass me and give me a little more time to think. The greatest security threat that was told to me at a group of military, national security, and municipal police agencies 5 years ago was described as the death of truth. When we could no longer believe each other. We can't believe what we see in mainstream media. We can't believe what we see in social media. We can't believe what we hear from our neighbor. We can't believe what we hear from elected officials and public officials. The death of truth allows the leader of lies to take over. We have to learn how to speak the truth to each other, live the truth around human rights, around anti-Semitism. We need truth in terms of legislation, standardization, and clarity around that. So you could define truth broadly. But we are now faced with, coming out of COVID, living almost extensively and entirely in the social media world where truth is almost impossible to find. I love what Etta said earlier on. So many of what you said, Etta, resonate with me, but that would be my one message. We've got to find our truth, speak our truth, live our truth, and that truth must be pointed towards human rights and eradication of hate.
Okay, thanks very much. Ida, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I want to touch on something the mayor said about leadership, and let me begin with that. One of the strongest tools we have is strong leadership. And when political leadership of this country, leadership of our provinces and of our cities step up and stand up against what is wrong, it sets a tone for the rest of society. And we have seen all too painfully incidents across this country, from the horrible tragedy in the mosque in Quebec City a few years ago, and the incident in Windsor, from the different incidents across the country. We have seen our political leaders and community leaders attend funerals, reach out to families. I myself was at the funeral, and we've seen our political leadership in the last few months condemn the violence and anti-Semitism and this wave of incidents that we've all experienced, from Prime Minister Trudeau to the premiers of the different provinces. And we have seen our political leadership step up. And the mayor is a little humble. It was the first municipality in Canada, Vaughan, that adopted the IRA definition, followed by a number of municipalities across Ontario and Quebec. But it was also the federal government that adopted the IRA definition in 2019, and the provinces of New Brunswick, Ontario, and I'm proud to say Quebec, under the leadership of Anti-Racism Minister Benoit Charette, that announced the adoption of IRA just a short month and a half-ish ago. And it's when leaders step up and take a stand that populations follow, and we understand that we all have to be soldiers in the fight against all forms of racism. And since we're talking about anti-Semitism today, and it's the one that affects me most directly, the fight against anti-Semitism, but it's the one that affects us all directly. When we look at Europe, when we look at different countries, we see when anti-Semitism is allowed to flourish, to fester, we see what happens to societies. We have to push it back. We have to stop it in its tracks and ensure that the kind of incidents, I mean, in Canada, we've had more incidents from January to May than we've had in all of 2020, which was a record year in anti-Semitic hate incidents. So I'd like to thank all the leaders here today and all the ministers who have participated and sat through this all-day conference to talk about this difficult issue, and say that this is really the first step, that we're all together and that we're not alone in the fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of racism.
Thank you. Dr. Schulman-Spar, your turn.
Yes, I sort of have 3 points that I would like to mention. The first one is sort of an encouragement, a call for not giving up. It's so easy to get overwhelmed. I think we all sometimes are overwhelmed. And I would say, I share that. I normally say that to our students and the educators, but I'm going to share that here with you, is we all have a choice. We can either be silent bystanders or we can be upstanders. And I think when we really break it down, it comes to that. And so I just call out or encouragement to know your choices and choose to be an upstander. Now, the second point is I would thank everyone so much to organize that, but not only to give us a chance to talk, but also to listen. I think listening is very important. And to me, good leadership, if I may add, that has also to do with listening to what the different victims groups have to say, what maybe other groups of at-risk groups have to say. And that brings me to the third point, which is partnership. We should not be shy away from asking for help with other at-risk groups, other groups. I think it's a fight we have to fight together, hand in hand. And speaking from our experience, we established extremely helpful partnerships, and I do think people do want to partner in the fight against anti-Semitism. Just as an example, our institution has a long-lasting partnership with the First Nations communities. We had many events where we would feature Holocaust survivor speakers alongside Indian residential school survivor speakers. And given the recent events and findings, this seems to even more, this support, mutual support in a way, how to process the trauma and so on. It really nourishes the work we do. So a call out for not to be shy and ask for partnerships.
Hey, thank you. I love that message of solidarity and the need for intersectionality in our advocacy around this, for sure. I'm a big believer that when one of us isn't safe, none of us are safe. So thank you for that message. Mayor Bevilacqua, we have a couple minutes left, and so I'll give you here the last word to wrap up our panel.
Thank you. And I think this is a good time to thank you, Carol, for all the work you do. And thank you for chairing this, being the moderator of this panel. I want to thank you for the great work you're doing representing the voices of municipalities at the federal level and beyond. And as a mayor, I really appreciate that very much. I'm very optimistic coming out of this. I'll tell you, this summit was a summit that was required, a summit that was needed. And I come out with a sense of clarity. I mean, I think we all know what we want. I mean, when you distill all the conversation to its essential core, we are driven by a single purpose, and that is to address this important issue of anti-Semitism. So we know what we want. And when challenged in life, knowing what you want is, I think, the number one determinant of success. And I think this summit has clearly illustrated that we are united in that purpose and that we are purpose-driven. We have the clarity that we need to address these issues. And, if I may draw from some literature, Rabbi Hillel's third question was, if not now, when? And I think that should be a great motivator for all of us. I think we now know the severity of the issue, and we've known for many, many years. The difference is that today's summit has really brought a lot of people together that have been able to articulate the severity of the issue, that have been able to offer, answers to some of the deep questions that anti-Semitism poses to humanity. And so that is a good thing. It's an approach, I think, that will serve us well. And it also gives us an opportunity to assess where we are today in a very clear way because of the many voices that have joined. But it also opens up an opportunity to perhaps down the road find out how we are progressing as a society and as a country in addressing this issue. So I would like to thank you again, and of course thank the Prime Minister and all his cabinet. Which, by the way, I noticed our large presence, which also speaks to how seriously this government takes this issue. And if I can also thank Irwin Cotler for his many years of teaching and the importance of this issue. It is really appreciated by all of us.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Well, and thank you to all of our panelists and everybody who joined in for this part of the conversation today. And I'll just echo, you've heard it from every one of the panelists, and I'll add my thank you on behalf of FCM as well to the federal government, Minister Chagger, to you and your team, and to the Prime Minister and his team for the organizing today's important conversation, and good luck with the rest of the afternoon. I believe I am turning it back over now to you, Peter. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Carol. Thank you to Mayor Beverly-Lacroix, to the Chief Slowly, to Ita and Delona for this really insightful and powerful conversation.